Thank you everyone for being here for today's last lecture with Gwen Sullivan. Last Lectures is a program at the CTL where distinguished faculty who are retiring are invited to present a last lecture, which is an opportunity to share some bits of wisdom from your illustrious career with students and colleagues and community members. So I'm so happy to turn it over to our dear colleague, Gwen Sullivan.
Thank you for being here. And before I begin with all kinds of comments, I'd like to introduce two of my children who came down here as a surprise. So my oldest son, Chris Gibber, who lives in Hayden. And this is my daughter, Katie Rebold, who lives in Genesee. Yes, that's Harold.
Katie's my partner in crime.
A couple of disclaimers, but first of all, thank you all for being here. I really appreciate it. I'm pretty excited about this. One of the things that you probably should be aware of, as I told Marlo, this will probably be a presentation a bit like The Creature, made of bits and pieces. So hopefully there will be something in here that you can take away or that you remember. When I was teaching in Japan 20 years ago, one of the teachers I worked with said he was convinced that teachers are frustrated actors. And I think it's so true. So this is not going to be serious all the time. My brain is a bit like a crazy quilt. It runs off. Oh, look at this. Oh, there's a pretty piece. Let's put that over here. Or maybe it's like a jigsaw puzzle. So there's a lot of stuff going on here. And I just kind of to contextualize this a little bit, I'm really going to focus a lot on art and science, partly because I taught a class with Heather Henson Ramsey a few years ago. And we did a science and literature combination that had to do with mental health. And it was really, really interesting to realize what the literature out there that addresses things like mental health. So, and we're in the science building, which is really, maybe kind of cool. So I have a couple of things. I put together 10 packets here that have some things that I will be using a little bit in this. I can make more if anybody wants one, and I'll just leave them here and you can come and pick them up. And I also bought a bunch of used copies of Frankenstein for my students this semester, because they get to the middle of the semester and go, oh, I don't have that book. So here are extra copies that you are free to have. Take one for yourself. If you've never read Frankenstein, you really should read it. And you should read it again if you've already read it. And I told my students, they were like, oh, I don't need that. I'm going to just turn my book in. I said, no, take one of these because I want you to read it at some point in your life again. And in this packet, I have put in here some a few poems that I think are kind of thematically connected. And most everything in here is printed on 2 sides, so make sure you check both sides. And then I also put in here an assignment that I created last semester as the final for the Frankenstein, and then have included some essays from students in that particular class in the fall semester that were really, I think, wonderful, because I gave them carte blanche. It's like, you can address anything you want to with this, the novel, go off any way you want to. One of the students, Lizzie Wilcoxon, some of you may know her, is a dual credit class student who's graduating from high school this year, going on to the U of I to do chemistry. She wrote the best essay that I think I've seen any student write. And it was just, I hardly ever give a student 100% on an essay, and I gave her 100%. But it really encapsulated the sort of science and then the art of writing about, writing well about science. And it has to do with what if humans could make it to Mars? And it's really, really interesting. And then I've included a couple of other ones from that same class that address different aspects of the novel. So feel free. I have Elizabeth's names on hers because she gave me permission to do that. The other ones don't have names on them because I didn't ask them. And then the last thing that's in there is a sheet with something I just kind of did on the spur of the moment with this semester's class, because I've been reading a book called The Personals that is written by an Irish journalist who reads the small ads, the want ads in the paper, and then he calls these people up and sees if he can interview them, ask them where, why they're selling this, and has these wonderful stories about people's lives. And I happened to be reading that. So I told my students, I said, write a personal ad for one of the characters in the novel. It was amazing how they all looked at me like, personal ads? What are you talking about? I put some of those in there. They were kind of interesting. They would have done better if they had more time to work on it. I will have a PowerPoint slide. So I'll be going through some of that stuff, but I'm also going to say, okay, we're going to stop. We have a little activity we're going to do in a few minutes. That's going to require you to close your eyes for a little while. So I hope you're all comfortable with that. All right. If you are ready to begin, by the way, that music that was playing, that's Ray Vaughan Williams. And the pictures kind of made me think about when Clairval and Victor are wandering around in the Scottish Highlands. Beautiful pictures of So I have this. I'm going to diminish this. Maybe I can do that. You guys are as quiet as my students. Watching me do things that you don't know what you're doing. Finally, somebody goes, okay, here's what you need to do. The left.
All the way.
From the beginning.
You're looking at something, here, and then you look at it up here, it's totally different. Okay, so here's the title of my presentation, Frankenstein, or How I Stopped Fearing and Learned to Love the Creature, which I think is a little slightly different than the original title that I gave to Marlo, but it felt like it was more grammatically correct there. There's my information for any of you who don't know me, and I think you all do. But I want to give credit to Mary Walston, perhaps Shelley. So this is going to be up here for a few minutes while I talk to you a little bit about some things. First of all, this book, and I'm going to pass this around because it's well worth listening or looking at, is the Rime of the Ancient Mariner, Samuel Taylor Coleridge's poem with illustrations by Gustave Doré. Yeah, Flaubert. Doré. And this is this poem is an important part of the beginning of the story. First of all, it's an example of a frame story, which we'll talk about in a few minutes. But also just that there is the mention of this poem in the novel itself. All right. So first of all, I want to talk a little bit about the power of narrative. Even a monster has a story. And this is a quote from Joy Harjo, who I believe is still the poet laureate of the United States. She was there for one session, and then generally the poet laureate, but I think she actually was still serving as poet laureate. And this is in reference to her stepfather, who apparently was pretty awful. And she said in an interview, one of her interviewer was asking her about this, and she said, he says, you write about this, you talk about him, and she said, even a monster has a story. And I thought, yep, that's kind of the way I feel about the creature in Frankenstein. The other one, monsters like angels are invoked by our individual and collective needs. Today, much as during that gloomy summer in 1816, we feel the need to seek their cold embrace. And this comes from an essay by Guillermo del Toro and Chuck Hogan called Why Vampires Never Die. For those of you that may not be familiar with this novel, when this story was written, in 1816, there had been a volcanic eruption that the ash covered so much of the world that it became that literally there was almost no summer. And Shelley and Percy Shelley, Byron and Dr. Polidori were, spending a little time in Geneva, hanging out. Weather was horrible. And they were reading a German book called Phantasmagoriana, which was little ghost stories is what the title means. And so they started talking about, we can't go out walking. We can't do anything. It's horrible. It's cold. It's pouring rain all the time. So they said, hey, how about if we tell a ghost story and have a little contest and see who can come up with the most horrific story? Well, Polidori he writes probably one of the original vampire novels. And the other people, they come up with their ideas. And every morning they ask Mary Shelley what she's come up with. And she's, nothing. I just can't think of anything. One night she has a dream. She gets up in the morning and she knows what the story is. She publishes her book anonymously originally, and it wasn't until a couple of years later that the book was finally, she gets credit for it. So here's a little more background about her, just because I think it's pretty important. She always says to the group, but revelation was at hand. Among the topics of conversation during those nights following Byron's proposal, one in particular seems to have caught her imagination. That was the nature of the principle of life and whether there was any probability of its ever being discovered and communicated. When in her introduction to her novel, she says that the talk of Dr. Erasmus Darwin's experiments and galvanism led to speculation that the component parts of a creature might be manufactured, brought together, and endued with vital warmth. With such thoughts in her mind, Mary went to bed. But when I placed my head on my pillow, I did not sleep. When I placed my head on my pillow, I did not sleep, nor could I be said to think. My imagination, unbidden, possessed and guided me, giving the successive images that arose in my mind with a vividness far beyond the usual bounds of reverie. And there's a couple of things I'm going to read you about what we know about the science of imagination. And we'll get to that in a little bit, but keep that in mind. I saw with shut eyes, but acute mental vision. I saw the pale student of unhallowed arts kneeling beside the thing he had put together. I saw the hideous phantasm of a man stretched out, and then, on the working of some powerful engine, show signs of life and stir with an uneasy, half-vital motion. She says in her introduction to her novel that she first didn't connect the horrific waking dream with her need to invent a ghost story. They've been talking about it and she could never come up with anything. According to the commentary about in the preface to her novel, the writer sees this as evidence that she was working in a very different kind of genre. As swift as light and as cheering was the idea that broke in upon me. I have found it. This is what Mary Shelley said. I found it. What terrified me will terrify the others. And I need only to describe the specter which had haunted my midnight pillow. On the morrow, I announced I had thought of a story. I began that day with the words. It was on a dreary night of November, making only a transcript of the grim terrors of my waking dream. The idea that you could reanimate a corpse using galvanic electricity was a little more than a wild notion in 1816. It had been attempted in some years before. In 1803, Giovanni Aldini was a nephew of the Italian anatomical experiment, Luigi Galvani experimenter. He published an extraordinary book in London, and full title was, be prepared, an account of the late improvements in galvanism, with a series of curious and interesting experiments performed before the commissioners of the French Nation Institute and repeated lately in the anatomical theaters of London, to which is added an appendix containing experiments on the body of a malefactor executed at Newgate. That's the entire title. So, in one of the experiments, one of those first experiments was hooking the electrodes up or wires up to a dead frog and watching the muscles contract. When I was in late elementary school, I had 7 brothers. I had 3 older brothers, and 2 of them were very, very interested in electricity. And so they decided that they had the perfect, subjects. So they would tell my sisters and I, and my friends, if they were there, that they would give us 50 cents if we would take a hold of these 2 wires that were hooked up to a 9-volt battery. Hang on to one, and of course, nothing happened. So you're you get a little shock. And of course, they loved it. I don't know whether they'd been reading Frankenstein at that point. They went on to become pretty adept with electronics of all kinds. They built a TV when they were still in high school, all kinds of stuff. But my middle sister screamed about everything. I mean, literally screamed about everything. So for her, every time they would do this, she would be willing to do it, but the whole time, and then she'd scream. And they would do it to my friend and I, and we'd just be like, okay, well, my friend thought the brothers were weird, but which was, there's a certain truth to that. So we have Mary Shelley coming up with this story, and it begins with, it is set as a crime story. But another thing I want to tell you, stories help train us to explore possibility as well as actuality, effortlessly and even playfully, and that capacity makes all the difference. And I think that's exactly what she's doing in this story. In humans, solutions found during dreaming can help solve problems. There are numerous examples of scientific and engineering solutions spontaneously visualized during sleep. Here's a couple of examples. Sorry. I have way too many things going on right now. This is a little. I'll show you. You just have to guess what it is. Does anybody know what one of the things is that happened in a dream? An invention? What do you?
Oh, Einstein, with one of his theories from a dream, like
Possibly. It was, one of the things was the sewing machine needle. This guy had been trying to figure out where to put the hole in a needle. He put it at the top, that didn't work. And he had a dream that he was in a pot in the jungle someplace, and he was about to be boiled by cannibals. And they were all standing around with spears, and in this tip of the spear, there was a hole right at the tip of the spear. He woke up and he said, that's how that needle has to be. And it worked. And another one, the neuroscientist Otto Levy dreamed of an experiment that proved nerve impulses are transmitted chemically. He immediately went to his lab to perform the experiment, later receiving the Nobel Prize. Elias Howe, who was the inventor of the sewing machine, Dmitry Mendeleev described seeing in a dream, quote, a table where all the elements fell into place as required. Awakening, I immediately wrote it down on a piece of paper. What was it? Periodic table. Yep. These discoveries were enabled by the same mechanism of involuntary imagination first acquired by mammals 140 million years ago. Then there's also imagining on purpose, so that you're actually thinking about this. What can I do? My dad was brilliant at this. My dad was an amazing woodworker, and he would sit and you think, what are you looking at? He's just staring off into space. He could figure out how to carve something. He could figure out how something ought to be put together, and then do it. And it's just spot on. And that is something that is, we can do. Okay. And this is from an article that's in a little short, brief article called The Evolutionary Origins of Human Imagination. And it's in Greater Good magazine. And I put together a bibliography that's in these folders as well. And that link is on there so you can look at the whole thing. It also helps us to deliberately combine our thoughts. You can envision all kinds of things that sometimes there are tests, spatial tests, things like that. Every artifact before 70,000 years ago could have been made by a creator who lacked this ability. On the other hand, starting about that time, there are various archaeological artifacts unambiguously indicating its present. Composite figurative objects such as lion, man, bone needles with an eye, bows and arrows, musical instruments, constructed dwellings, adorned burials, suggesting this belief in an afterlife, and many more. And I think this is one of the things that probably Victor Frankenstein was doing. He was actually practicing some of that ability when he thinks he can put together a person out of parts. All right, so Frankenstein is a frame story. This is a really, really old practice. This is not like, she didn't start this. Jane Austen did it before her, but it was even way, way, way 1,000 years before that. So you have a narrator telling the story, and in that narrator is telling a story that he's heard, and you're then, So in this novel, there are 3 narrators. We've got Robert Walton, who is, he's down here, but he's the one who starts it. He's locked in the ice in the Arctic because he's gone there thinking he's going to discover the Northwest Passage, which he never does. And this is where the Rime of the Ancient Mariner figures into this whole thing. So he's writing to his sister in England and saying, oh, I finally got a ship. I've hired all these men. We're sailing out in like August, and wonderful things are going to happen. He has no idea how long it's going to take those letters to get to his sister. He doesn't know if he's ever going to see her again. And then he lays this all out. Then he starts telling her, as they're frozen in the ice, that this event that happens. And what he sees first is Frankenstein's creature. And the creature is running across the ice. And it's kind of like, did I see what I thought I saw? This 8-foot tall man. Anybody in here over 6 feet tall? Guys, stand up. Now I want you to imagine, use your voluntary imagination. Add 2 feet onto the height of these guys. Okay, and then make them proportionally sized to their height. That's Frankenstein's creature. Okay, so they see this thing running across the ice, and then about a day later, they see another man in a dog sled who sees the ship, and they pull him onto the ship. He's all but dead. It's Victor Frankenstein, who's been chasing the creature. Okay, so that's kind of giving you so that's what Walton's telling us. So basically, the whole story we get is Walton telling us what Victor Frankenstein told him, and then Frankenstein telling us what the creature told him after the creature learns how to talk. So you have to wonder, if you've got these 3 first-person narrators, are they getting everything right? Is Walton, who's really the person reporting here, is he getting it right? He says at one point that he tried to write everything down that Victor tells him. He tried to write it down verbatim. But, we're talking about, and then does Victor remember what the creature tells him? Because, he's not writing down everything the creature's saying. He's trying to get away from the creature. Or he's trying to catch up with the creature, actually wants to kill him. Okay. So that's the sort of frame of this entire novel. So, of course, it's really all about the idea that you can somehow bring dead people back to life. Yes, wouldn't that be great? And there's all kinds of commentary about Mary Shelley having lost, a child. Her mother died when she was, a baby. She never knew her mother. Mary Shelley has a baby that dies right away. And, that preys on her mind. She lost another child. That idea that maybe we could come back, that we could bring these people back to life. So this is a comment about a book called Lysias, The Search for What It Means to Be Alive. And this idea that chemists are creating droplets that can sense their environment and multiply. And Victor Frankenstein was a chemist. He wasn't a biologist. He was studying chemistry. So keep that thought in mind. Then, whoops. Did you know that half your DNA isn't human? That somebody somewhere has the same face as you? And this book is like, learn how various parts of your body don't actually belong to you. So I want you to keep that in mind as we go on. And the book is How to Be Human, the Ultimate Guide to Your Amazing Experience. I had a friend whose husband was stationed in Germany in the service, and she wrote to me once and said, I saw your doppelganger. I swear it was you. And I almost walked up to her and said, Gwen, what in the world are you doing here? So when I read this, I thought, well, there you go. There are people, it's like somebody has the same face as you. That's pretty bizarre. But apparently it's true. All right. So if you're going to start building a creature, you've got to have parts. All right. Louisiana is the only state in the US that explicitly forbids the trading and ownership of human bones. So don't plan to set up your lab in Louisiana. If you need a brain, check next to a railroad track. I have a little newspaper clipping that I like in the last week. I've lost it because I was sharing it with my students. And I think it was in New York that somebody found like 7 brains lying by a railroad track. And it's like, some of them had been preserved, and they were probably from, falling off of a train or something from a. I mean, I gotta stay home and take care of things. I'm just gonna send my brain off. No clue, but probably they were from a supply house, science, or a school ordered some brains. Who knows? It's just one of those bizarre things. So brains may not be they may be easier to find than you think.
Searching in our classrooms.
Search in your classroom, pull out on the railroad tracks. All right. What I need you to do now is close your eyes. And you must keep them closed until I tell you that you can open them. Don't be startled by sounds.
Thank you, Igor.
All right, before you open your eyes, don't open them yet. I want you to imagine yourself in a charnel house. Anybody know what that is? A charnel house was a place where bones that had been dug up when you had to open a grave to plant somebody else in it. Think about the scene from Hamlet. Alas, poor Yorick, I knew him, Horatio. That's what was happening. They were digging the grave for Ophelia, and they happened to dig up Yorick, or at least Hamlet thinks it's York. But it was a charnel house was a place where they kept bones once they had dug them up. And sometimes they actually buried people there. You can imagine what it smelled like. All right. You may open your eyes, but before you do anything else, just be assured that these bones have been hermetically sealed in a mayonnaise jar on Uncle Waggle's front porch since noon yesterday.
No.
Oh, actually, these bones have been in this jar for probably close to 20 years. I found them when I was helping to clean the highway when I was teaching high school. Unfortunately, I was with our school counselor who was just up for this kind of stuff. And I was like, oh, I should take those home. We found something to put them in. They've been bleached. They've been in this jar for 20 years. So what your job is now, see if you can identify those bones. See if you can place them in any kind of order. Feel free to take your bones and go help somebody else's table and say, hey, I need a vertebrae. Or I got all these ribs, but I don't have any, I don't know what any other thing was. I don't think this poor dog's whole skeleton was there, but do the best you can.
There's the tail in the boxes here.
Milo needs a partner if anybody is.
All right.
Oh, yeah, yeah.
Okay. Can I bring all my phones over there?
Yeah, on the neck, head attaches. It looks like it. Yeah, it looks pretty good. Where is
So these are pretty. That seems fun.
orientation?
No.
Oh, this. Ribs. Yeah.
These would be front legs.
This is the only one, this is like a femur pelvis.
Radius and ulna?
Humanity versus animal.
We have one.
Yeah. Depending.
This could be
Socket.
it actually looks like
Yeah.
Yeah, it's definitely.
clavicle. Okay.
Anybody have a
Oh,
We've got a skull. What do you think? It wasn't good taste, but.
Yeah. Too big to be a cat. It's too big for a cat.
It's definitely a rabbit.
No. This would be a different shape. So cat or dog is over. Could be a raccoon. Could be a raccoon. That's a really long. I don't know. That is out of proportion. You're here.
Right, it would be at the beginning or end.
Somebody lift up the skull.
Oh, there's a fish.
Oh, that's a kitty.
That's
This one is a cat. I think the smaller one. I found that. The
They
biggest
said a
one.
cutie.
Yeah.
The cat.
A skull. You have a skull over here. Oh, yeah, that makes more
So it looks like we got a leg bone.
Here's a bigger skull.
Yeah,
Oh, there's a
Yeah.
You got the teeth.
Yeah.
Maybe.
It could be a. Yeah, I think that's actually.
Vertebra.
Is that
The
a?
scapula.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Like a forearm or like a bottom or leg.
Maybe.
No, that would have to be for a dog.
The dog.
Okay.
No.
She'd pull out her like nursing knowledge
Like towards the end.
About it, I just don't remember.
Biggest thing. These are the big.
Well, so I think this is maybe a lower, the two bones. You always have the tibia and tibia. Is
They're
not
not,
really very-
that would be like.
So I don't know if they actually. go down.
Yeah.
So that would be lower limb.
You see that's the tail.
And then tail, yeah. And then this, I think,
Yeah.
Well, this is the knee part.
Yeah.
Oh.
There you go, there you go. And bones feed together, bone to bone. Bye bone.
Good job.
Do the-
No, it is not.
And this is why she teaches English.
She's a good singer.
Hear the word of the Lord.
Ladies and gentlemen, have a seat. None of you obviously had all of the parts, even it would take you a while to figure out. And there are probably some things missing because you picked it up off the highway. But you can imagine, I'm hoping you can kind of imagine what it must have been like for Victor when he decides that he's going to create this human. And he spends his nights in the charnel houses and digging up, recently deceased people, probably convicts. That used to be a pretty common thing. Convicts would sell their bodies so their family would have a little bit of, money after they got hanged or whatever. And then they would, anatomy students would go, it's, you can't do that. Nowadays, really is illegal then, and it's really illegal now. So don't leave your mother in the basement for 20 years and collect her Social Security and stuff because it will come back to haunt you. Before we move on to talking a little bit specifically about Victor, I want to show you, first of all, that there's a couple of
Click over on that side now. You try it. Does it work now?
Okay, so before we get to this, I want to tell you that there's been like over 50 film versions of Frankenstein. The first one was in 1910, and it's simply called Frankenstein. And then there's even an Italian one, a really early 1921. There's several of them that are just called Frankenstein. There was a cartoon in 1933, another one in 1934. The Bride of Frankenstein came out in 1935. That's right, you dressed as your Bride of Frankenstein.
On occasion.
Frankenstein in 39. There's one called Hell's a Poppin' in 1941. There's the Ghost of Frankenstein. Frankenstein meets the Wolfman. House of Frankenstein, or House of Dracula, of Abbott and Costello meet Frankenstein. The Curse of Frankenstein. I was a teenage Frankenstein. That was 1957. Oh, well, I wasn't quite a teenager. The Revenge of Frankenstein in 1958. Frankensteined, 1958. Cartoon, The Evil of Frankenstein, Dr. Devil and Mr. Hare, which was a cartoon, Frankenstein versus Baragon, The War of the Gargantuas, Casino Royale, Frankenstein Created Woman, Mad Monster Party, and all of those in 1967. In the 60s, there were a lot of Frankenstein movies made of various kinds. I don't know what was happening, but we were thinking Frankenstein. And then in the 70s, The Horror of Frankenstein, Dracula contra Frankenstein, The Curse of Frankenstein, Mad Monsters, Frankenstein 80, Flesh for Frankenstein, Blackenstein, another Frankenstein. And in 1973, Frankenstein, The True Story. The ones that claim to be the true story actually are a little closer to the novel. Frankenstein and the Monster from Hell. And Young Frankenstein, Frankenstein. Funny movie. The Terror of Frankenstein, and another Frankenstein, and then The Bride, and then Frackia versus Dracula, The Monster Squad, Frankenstein General Hospital. Love
That was.
Frankenstein Unbound in 1990, Frankenstein, another Frankenstein 1992, Mary Shelley's Frankenstein in 94, Monster Mash 1995, House of Dracula, The Creeps in 1997, and Alvin and the Chipmunks Meet Frankenstein, Rock and Roll Frankenstein, both in 1999, Van Helsing, which apparently has some connection to Frankenstein, another Frankenstein movie, and then one called Igor, or Igor, 2008, House of the Wolfman, Frankenweenie in 2012, Hotel Transylvania, Frankenstein's Army, 2013, I, Frankenstein in 2014, Frankenstein versus the Mummy, Hotel Transylvania, Victor Frankenstein, Depraved in 2019, and Frankenstein's Monster, which is a short film. So there has been so many films made about Frankenstein, which is interesting because I argue that Frankenstein is not the main character. Creature is the main character. Okay, so we have the creator and the creation. And we have, and this is what the creature says to him. I was poor, helpless, miserable wretch. And this is, I'm going to be backtracking here a little bit because this happens a little bit later in the novel. I knew and could distinguish nothing, but feeling pain invade me on all sides. I sat down and wept. No distinct ideas occupied my mind. All was confused. But he has a great urge to survive. So he learns to start taking care of himself. And you're probably aware, that that Frankenstein has abandoned his creature. And he wakes up when the creature kind of comes to, and Victor sees him, sees what he's actually created. He runs away and leaves him. So I'm going to show you a couple of clips here from this is the 1931 movie, which is considered, I mean, it's in the sort of movie archives of the best movies. Yeah. This is probably a reference to what the creature tells Frank about seeing the sun and realizing that it was light during the day and that the moon was light at night. Okay, so I want you to keep in mind what the monster looks like in this, because that is pretty much the way the creature is portrayed in almost all movies. However, now we're going to see a little bit different portrayal. I mean, it's kind of a takeoff of that movie in something that's much more modern. And just FYI, the way that the monster is described is that he was not as ugly as is generally thought of. He had flowing black locks, he had perfect teeth, but he had yellow eyes and black lips. And he was 8 feet tall and proportionately large. So we have this sort of really weird mix of. Now, this is a monsters episode where something happens differently. It's kind of the reverse of. Okay, so there's a scene in the novel where the creature sees himself for the first time. He looks at because he doesn't know why he's had such negative reactions from the villagers and everybody who ever sees him and runs away screaming. He sees himself in the water and then realizes, he says about himself, I'm a monster. It's no wonder that nobody's going to sit still or talk to him. And at the same time, he doesn't know how to talk at that point. So it's really, he can't explain himself. Gretel Ehrlich has written a book called Match to the Heart. Has anybody read that? One woman's story about being struck by lightning. Oh my gosh, I've put it in this bibliography. It is amazing. She was in Wyoming. She's on a ranch. She gets hit by lightning, and as I recall, it was out of a clear blue sky, which happens. And she is unconscious for quite some time. Her dogs would not go near her for a long time afterwards. Her dogs were with her. She would pass out without ever, she didn't even, it would just suddenly pass out. She was in the hospital. She couldn't remember what happened. She had to call her father to come and live with her because literally she would stand up and she'd pass out. And they couldn't figure out what was wrong with her. Finally, she found a doctor who said, "Oh, I think it's because you were struck by lightning." Puts her on a board, like a tilt table, tilts her upside down, and as soon as he does it, she passes out. And she said it was horrifying because she knew what was going to happen. But it was such a weird experience that she started searching out people who had also been struck by lightning. Found out things like one man could go out in the coldest weather with just a t-shirt and be fine. He couldn't do that before. One woman couldn't remember who she was. She literally had to look at her driver's license to remember her name. Somebody else who was never a great mathematician, he could do really complicated math problems in his head. So it does all kinds of bizarre things to you, and upsets your everything. So when you think about Victor using electricity to sort of animate this creature, there's all kinds of things that probably happen. And he sees that as Victor decides that he can do this when he sees that lightning hit a tree, which also does really weird things to trees. This is with the cell structure and all kinds of stuff. Okay, so we have that, the creature, and I'm going to show you one more clip here, just briefly. This is from the same 1931 film. This is after the creature has kind of been left to his own devices, and Victor leaves him, and he goes off and starts wandering around. This actually happens in the novel when he escapes. He finds this little girl, he's wandering around, finds her, she falls in the river, and he pulls her out, saying you're drowning. But when her father happens to show up right at that moment and shoots the creature because he thinks he's trying to hurt his daughter. So this scene is portrayed, that scene is portrayed a little bit differently here.
Oh, gracious.
This is probably a conflation of another scene in the novel when the monster following Victor, because Victor goes home again after he goes through a notice but hasn't noticed before it leaves the creature and realizes what he's done. And he just by chance, follows him to the family home, and he finds Victor's little brother who's out playing, and he thinks to himself, oh, here's a child. This child that won't have developed all these prejudices against me, won't see me as horrible. And so he wants to make friends with this child, and the little brother is just like screams at him and says, you're horrible, you're a monster, all this kind of stuff. And so he hangs on to him because he's trying to get him to calm down. He wants to be friends with him. And he ends up strangling. And Victor, when he comes home and finds out that his little brother is dead, he knows that it's the monster. Only he thinks that the monster is the creature who's done it on purpose, which was not at all what he was doing. It was just this sort of like trying to get this child to accept him. He can't talk for a long time. And when I watch him and when I think about this, Helen Keller was, at least the way she's portrayed in The Miracle Worker, was just horrible. Grabbed food off of her family's plates and everything else. And it wasn't until Annie Sullivan is able to finally help her see this word is this thing that she opens up. And the monster's kind of the same way. He can't talk, he can't express himself until he spends some time with this living in the woodshed of this family that has become impoverished. And they're French speakers, and he starts listening to them and eventually kind of begins to understand what they're saying, figuring it out. I have a couple of little boys that live next door to me. Both of them have speech impediments. The middle one literally didn't talk until he was probably 4 years old. The only way he communicated was by screaming. And they were outside all the time. And he was screaming, or he'd hit his brother with something. And when he started kindergarten this last fall, and so for about 6 months or a year before that, he started doing speech therapy. I still can't understand him sometimes, but he'll come over and, help me with things. He's a completely different kid because he's able to communicate. I think it's really important to recognize that, and that the creature is stymied by that. He can't express himself. When he finally catches up with Victor and tells Victor his whole, this is what I've been living through for the last couple of years. He talks to him about what nature meant for him, how he learned to read, and then he later finds 3 books. He finds Paradise Lost and Plutarch's Lives and The Sorrows of Werther. And he says that's what changed his life. So coming back to the it's really Paradise Lost that makes the world come alive for him, and he is far more sort of thoughtful, philosophical than his creator is. So this is when he sees himself in the pond. And he says, how was I terrified when I viewed myself in a transparent pool? At first, I started back, unable to believe that it was indeed I who was reflected in the mirror. And when I became fully convinced that I was in reality the monster that I am, I was filled with the bitterest sensations of despondence and mortification. Alas, I did not yet entirely know the fatal effects of this miserable deformity. And here, then we start moving into this sort of science and humanities, because Victor, he can only see the world from the scientific thing. It's like, I created this. And the monster uses the language of science, but he says, at that time, I knew nothing of the science of words or letters. And he calls language a godlike science, and he learns it by listening to the DeLacy's. I conjectured that he found on the paper Science for Speech when he watches them reading and realizes that he made these connections between what they were saying and what they are reading. And then he begins to, when he finds the books, he's able to start reading them. And he says, while I improved in speech, I also learned the science of lenses. It was Safiye. And Safiye is like she's this Arab woman who's trying to learn. She's girlfriend of one of the DeLacy's. This is open to me a wide field for wonder and delight. As he learns human history from overhearing the DeLacy's, he also learns that humans are, as he says, at once so powerful, so virtuous and magnificent, and yet so vicious and base. And then he says, of what a strange nature is knowledge. When he finds the books and actually begins to understand, he says, my person was hideous and my stature gigantic. What did this mean? Who was I? What was I? Whence did I come? What was my destination? These questions continually recurred, but I was unable to solve them. Paradise Lost excited different and far deeper emotions. I often referred to the several situations as their similarities struck me to my own. Like Adam, I was apparently united by no link to any other being in existence, but his state was far different from mine in every other respect. He had come forth from the hands of God, a perfect creature, happy and prosperous. Guarded by the especial care of his creator, he was allowed to converse with and acquire knowledge from beings of a superior nature, but I was wretched, helpless, and alone. Many times I considered Satan as the bitter emblem of my condition, for often, like him, when I viewed the bliss of my protectors, the bitter gall of envy rose within me. I sickened as I read, hateful day when I received life, accursed creator, why did you form a monster so hideous that even you turned from me in disgust? God in pity made man beautiful and alluring after his own image, but my form is a filthy type of yours, more horrid even from the very resemblance. Satan had his companions, fellow devils, to admire and encourage him, but I am solitary and abhorred. All right. I want to show you a couple of things before I get to the end here. One of the things that I really think we need to do more of is that intersection of science and art. Whether that is art of, the written word, art like what we see on the walls, whatever, creating art. And that's when the creature starts to become more human. He starts noticing things. He notices music is one of the things that really moves him. Here's the family members playing music and singing. And it opens up something for him that he never had before. And I've put this article, I've put a link to this. It's what art does for your brain. And one of the things that this is a review of a book called Your Brain on Art by Susan Magsamen and Ivy Ross. And one of the things they say is that music has the most power. And it can heal us. Examples of many people using art when they need to heal. And that's kind of where the creature begins to become more human. The arts can transform you like nothing else. They can help move you from sickness to health, stress to calm, or sadness to joy. And they enable you to flourish and thrive. Are you ready? The world and its beauty are there waiting for you. Probably some of Victor's problems is that he's so focused on the science aspect of it. His humanity is like, we never see him listening to music. We don't see him. He goes out in nature when he's trying to recover from his fits of depression. But the whole time he's out there, he's thinking about, shall I just jump into the lake from the boat and drown myself because life's horrible. And meanwhile, the creature is beginning to see the world in this beauty. And when spring comes, he's just elated. And he understands, he's reading Paradise Lost. We never see Victor reading anything. I mean, he was reading when he was young, but he was reading all kinds of stuff that was outdated. And that's part of the reason why he believed he could do what he did. So we have this sort of, juxtaposition, but almost this fighting between science and the humanities. And they shouldn't be. There's this huge connection between them. I've listed the best American science writing in that bibliography as well, because I think there's some really fantastic stuff in there. But here's a little visual. I'm sorry I did this probably, but I want to show you a visual. This is something that I've had I found it in a magazine. I think it might have been in the New Yorker, 1993. And I was so blown away by these pictures that, and it's really the perfect sort of juxtaposition of science and art. And I'll give you a little bit more information about this. And this happens to be like commonplace crystals. And such as, for example, this is ascorbic acid. These were taken with a, I have to read this to you because I'm not going to remember. This is a person who did these. His name is Dennis Kunkel. He has 2 resumes, one for a PhD carrying microscopist in the Department of Neurological Surgery at the University of Washington, and one for the prize-winning contributor and curator of museum quality photomicrography. His work appears in scientific journals and art galleries. And he's done this with like a polarized camera. So that's a picture of ascorbic acid. This is but I am going to show you that whole thing, and then you'll get to see it. Testosterone and adrenaline. Now, this is probably what the creature was, that's estradiol. This is testosterone and adrenaline mixture. Get a sense of what an effect that has. And then one more. Thank you. This is citric acid. This is caffeine. This is adrenaline. This is insulin. Vitamin E, progesterone. How soft and rounded all those shapes are. By comparison with testosterone. And then the last one, it's tetracycline. And then we're going to say farewell. This is vitamin B1. Nicotine. I love the fact that it looks like smoke. And this is tetracycline. All right, some of you probably know that when we're back to the beginning here, we are on board the ship with Robert Walton. He has, we've seen the creature has caught up with, or the creature is out ahead, and Victor is trying to find him. The creature has. The creature has been killing, the creature never eats meat. I mean, he himself, he eats berries and wings and all that kind of stuff. He never kills anything. But he does when Victor is chasing him across the Arctic. He leaves things for him. So he wants him to stay alive because he wants revenge on him just as much as Victor wants revenge on the creature. But Victor dies. And he dies on board ship. The creature comes looking for him, and Robert Walton tells him that he's dead. And he's pretty much undone. But Robert Walton is also one of the few people that actually talks to the creature because he's heard his whole story from Victor. And so he can't stand to look at him because he thinks he's so hideous. But he does want to know, sort of talk the creature to tell him in his own words about his experience. And so this is what the creature says to Robert Walton as he, climbs out the window because he knows that now that his creator is dead. He is dead who called me into being, and when I shall be no more, the very remembrance of us both will speedily vanish. Some years ago, when the images which this world affords first opened upon me, when I felt the cheering warmth of summer and heard the rustling of the leaves and the warbling of the birds, and these were all to me, I should have wept to die. Now it is my only consolation. Polluted by crimes and torn by the bitterest remorse, where can I find rest but in death? Farewell, I leave you. Farewell, Frankenstein. Soon these burning miseries will be extinct. My spirit will sleep in peace, or if it thinks, it will surely not think thus. Farewell. Now, I think one of the reasons why it's possible to have all these sequels and stuff to Frankenstein is because we don't know if the monster really dies or not. He says he's going to go build his funeral pyre and throw himself on there, but we're left at the end of the novel not knowing if he really is dead. And of course, he wanted a creature, a female creature, and Frankenstein starts to build it and then tears it apart. And the creature happens to be standing there watching it. And that's when it was like, okay, man, we're done. It's war from now on in. You could not give me even that. You who have, he famously says, I will be with you on your wedding night. And Victor thinks that the creature is going to kill him on his wedding night. And it turns out that, in fact, he kills his bride. And then he's like, I should have figured that out. I should have known that. But he's so self-centered, so self-focused. He can't see anything else. He can't see beyond himself. The creature is a far more articulate person than either Robert Walton or he's amazing. That whole section where he's telling Victor what has happened to him since he's been out wandering around the world. He's also amazingly strong. He can climb, straight up sheer rock walls, all kinds of stuff that most humans can't do. But that could also be one of the things that happens when, because of his being struck by lightning, he can handle the cold and all that kind of stuff. And Victor has probably all this time literally been trying to keep going with, creating this monster, and it's on his mind all the time. And it's producing all of this cortisol in his system, which can be a good thing when you need to run from something. But if it's constant, it has the effect of causing insomnia and, and depression, all kinds of things. So he really is, cortisol wasn't sort of teased out as a particular hormone until the mid 20th century. So she wouldn't have known that. Mary Shelley would not have known that, but his symptoms are very much, this is what he's probably like spiritual poisoning almost. That because he works, he doesn't sleep for days at a time, and then he gets depressed, and then he's, he spends months totally not knowing who he is. So that he's, and everything he does and says is basically an excuse or a justification for what he's done. And Walton is kind of the same way. He's self-taught. He didn't have much schooling. So he reads all these books about exploration and going, I'm going to go out in the world and do this, same thing. It's the creature who reads Paradise Lost and, Plutarch's Lives. A much better sense of the way the world operates, and a much better sense of himself.
He was an English major.
It was exactly. I am a biology minor. I think there is a good way to combine those two things. So I hope that some of you will buddy up to one of your science colleagues and say, hey, or if you're in sciences, buddy up with one of your humanities colleagues. Teach together. I mean, there's 1,000 ways I think you could approach just this novel. I skimmed across the surface. Thank you for being here.
We gather up your bones. By the way, folks, retirement party for Gwen and Auctioneering.